That's not to say all marketing procurement is evil. That's not the case at all. There are some people in marketing procurement who are incredibly good. But I think pretty much everybody who is very good in marketing procurement would say that they represent the minority, and that most organizations have not yet recalibrated the role of marketing procurement as to managing investments such that actually they often work against the best interests of their own organizations, which is pretty hard to fathom, but is the case.
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Thank you ever so much for joining us on the Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast today.
My pleasure, Mike. Nice to see you.
You too, again. So we, for our listeners' sake, we've known each other quite a bit. We've even done gigs together, haven't we?
We've actually met in person since we first met. I mean, there were several years went by before we actually managed to shake hands. But yes, we've now actually met in the flesh and we can attest to each other's reality. Yes, we actually are. We're real people,
and we've danced on stage together.
We have performed. We have performed as a duo. We made Morecambe and Wise look like amateurs.
I quite like that. So anyway, before our listeners tune out, David, we should probably get into who are you, what do you do, and anything vaguely interesting about you.
So my name's David Meikle. I am an author and a consultant and an intermediary and a trainer. And I operate in the space of the triangle of doom, which is created between marketing, procurement, marketers and agencies, which I identified as something that was quite problematic probably about 14 years ago, and have been working on ever since. So my thesis turned into a book called How to Buy Gorilla, which I published in 2017. And I have recently published another book called Tuning Up, which is about managing relationships in advertising and marketing. And I'm an intermediary. So if a brand, I've been described as a white glove intermediary, i.e. one that goes soup to nuts on the service. So I get really involved in the search, much more like a headhunter rather than a recruiter.
Right.
And get much more involved in the intermediary process and run sourcing processes and pitches for brands.
So you're that kind of person that if there are agency salespeople listening, which I'm sure there are many commercial people listening, you're the kind of person that if an RFP turns up, or rather a brief turns up, it may well have come from someone, either you or someone like you from a brand.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't suggest that agencies necessarily need to flock to send me their creds, because that's not the way that I work. I think there are a lot of intermediaries who there are a lot of intermediaries who spend a lot of time and agencies' money with membership fees to just keep up to date with what's going on with agencies. And I run much more of a bespoke service whereby we define what it is that the client needs, and I go to market specifically looking for that. And I have my own methods for segmenting the agency market against services, against size, against capabilities, and so on. So I don't collect stacks and stacks of creds. I go to the market against a specific brief, and it's a polite way of saying, "Don't call me, I'll call you."
Exactly right. Correct. And something unusual about you, David? Anything interesting or slightly unusual?
Interesting or unusual? For a number of years, I would routinely bribe law enforcement officers. How's that? to put that into a slightly more
first, then.
to put that into what's possibly a slightly more acceptable context. Between the end of 2003 and the end of 2007. I was head of country for Ogilvy, Russia. So there's a certain kind of emergent way of working in Russian society, which involves greasing several palms in order to avoid trumped up traffic offences. So yes, I'm not a UK villain. I've just been a normal civilian in day-to-day Moscow, but it does sound exciting.
Excellent. So let's move on from that, shall we? So
probably best.
First question. So we did have a pre-call, and we kind of agreed on 3 broad questions. So let's start with kind of like the first one, which is talking about investment and risk as opposed to cost and deliverables when you're in that kind of triangle of doom. What do you mean by that, and why is it important?
So the agency world does itself a massive disservice every time it produces something called a cost estimate for a client, because it speaks the language of cost, and a cost is something which is undesirable. A cost is much more appropriate for a distress purchase, like the cost of a gas bill, or the cost of an electricity bill, or the cost of council tax. If we didn't have to pay them, we wouldn't want to pay them. But there isn't a single aspect of marketing, down to the floor space that a marketing department occupies, that doesn't need to be calculated in what is a overall marketing return on investment. It's not a return on cost, it's a return on investment. And I think that whenever we're talking about costs, particularly with procurement, costs are zeroed in on as, well, that's something, therefore, that I want to attack, not something that I therefore want to maximize. And you end up automatically in a conversation about cost reduction rather than investment maximization. But the other important part of this, and again, particularly in the context of procurement, is that many agencies will have experienced procurement in the context of trying to reduce costs, or as we're now going to call them going forward, trying to reduce investments. But they are often unaware that the other part of the procurement role is the mitigation of risk.
Exactly.
And this is particularly important when it comes to investments, because marketing investments are like any other investment. It's like your pension fund investments. It makes no difference which investment you're talking about. If you want to have a higher return from a lower investment, then you have to increase your risk. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll get it because you've increased your risk. But there isn't a way of getting a predictable higher return without there being a higher degree of risk and therefore unpredictability. Those dynamics exist in marketing as they exist anywhere else. And it's sometimes helpful to go to the extremes of a scale so that you can kind of illustrate that. So, for example, if you were launching a new brand so let's take Barbie as a great example, right? The Barbie movie is a terrific example. The spend on the Barbie movie in marketing was greater than the cost of the production of the film.
Wow.
This was an effort to make sure that people would go and see this film at the cinema from the get-go in very, very, very large numbers. And it was incredibly effective. But there wasn't a, let's not do that, it looks a bit pricey. It was a, what else can we do? What else can we do? What else can we do? So they absolutely maximized investment because of the surety of a return. You go so far that there's no way people aren't going to respond to this. Now, imagine that they'd spent half. What would have been the risk of the box office being less successful? Imagine they'd spend a quarter. And each time you reduce that, you can see that the risk of the critical mass of excitement not happening is clear. And any other marketing campaign works exactly the same way. So if you're investing little, either expect a little return, or go for maximum, or go for high calculated risk. But that's not a conversation that agencies and clients have, because we don't like to use the R word. But the reality is,
we don't. No, you're right.
Peter Drucker said all profit is derived by risk, because you're transforming what it is that you have in an asset of money into commodities that you then manufacture into goods in the hope that you'll be able to sell them. But you have the hope that you'll be able to sell them. It's in the future, much like any marketing campaign is in the future. There'll be a number of marketers who know that you can't confirm what the future is going to be from 2019. If ever we should be more attuned to having a conversation about risk, it's now.
Exactly.
But it's not a conversation that we have. And we can have that conversation in the context of, well, it's an investment. So, yes, you can reduce our fees if you want to, but you'll be reducing our hours. And if you reduce our hours, you reduce the time that we spend finding an optimal strategy. You reduce the time that we spend developing a creative idea. You reduce the time that we spend executing that creative idea to the best of our ability. And if you're capping all of those, then you're responsible for the risk that they create. If we are determining what is an optimal spend in those areas, i.e. a point before diminishing return on an investment, at what point, if we say this is how much we need for strategy, this is how much we need for creative, this is how much we need for execution, then your ability is to say, so you can do that and you can be confident of our return, in which case you've given the responsibility to the agency and you've given the agency the circumstances that they asked for to deliver it. So there's a whole thing in there about my latest theme that you might have noticed I've just woven in there, Mike, which is about responsibility.
I was going to say, very clever that you wrote. Exactly, correct. Your new book, precisely. David, why don't you talk about your new book for a second?
Available exclusively
Available all good sellers.
Available exclusively from tuningup.co.uk, but also you can find paperback versions and Kindle versions from your Jeff Bezos website. So by all means,
excellent.
Do get in touch if you're interested. So thank you for that little plug, that little commercial break that we managed to crowbar in there. Sorry, Mike.
And again, David, we'll make sure at the end you get to also repeat it as well. So that's always good news.
Lovely. Thank you.
I mean, interestingly, on the Barbie movie, I wonder. I mean, there must have been agencies involved. Clearly, I doubt they were having a conversation about how do I reduce your fee, and how do I minimise the amount that we're going to invest across all different types of media. As you say, that's unlikely to have happened.
I would imagine so, but I would also imagine that, I mean, just judging by my own experience of that fully integrated, almost ubiquitous campaign, it probably went beyond a point of diminishing return. And that's because the studio decided we can't afford for this to flop. So I don't care that it's gone beyond the point of diminished return. I want to make sure that this is a success. And they traded off the price for the risk. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. You can do that launching any brand.
Correct. Exactly.
So I would encourage agencies, as I do all the time, never to use the word cost when they mean investment. And you should change all of your cost estimate letterheads to investment recommendations. And, you know, my clients only ever get investment recommendations from me.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, on the investment recommendation, are you talking about both the spend on media or third-party activation and fees, or just the third-party media and activation?
This is when we get into the thorny issue of what many of our American colleagues would call working versus non-working expenditure.
They would
where
indeed.
the definition of working is expenditure which has a more predictable return on investment that is more measurable, such as media, discounting, activation, etc. So I
sampling,
know sampling. So I know that if I give out 200,000 samples, then X is likely to convert, and Y is therefore likely to be my return, and therefore Z is likely to be my profit. So, however, the non-working is therefore the money that's paid to the agency to have an idea that might occupy a piece of advertising space. It is the money that's paid to an agency to develop a brand strategy or an advertising strategy that would create an advertising campaign. And the idea is that a lot of firms have got targets whereby they have a desired ratio of working versus non-working. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. One is the world has changed massively in the last 20 years insofar as media is now so fragmented that integration and managing integration is a much more complicated, much more difficult process than it was before. So that's problem number one, and therefore the likelihood that it will require more work up front in the determination of strategy and creative idea is greater. Pause for thought. Problem number two, with the whole idea of working versus non-working, is that the effectiveness of non-working determines the effectiveness of working. So, for example, and again, if you use extremes to make a point, imagine having virtually zero non-working expenditure and just buying the advertising space and putting, please buy Citroen cars, right? So that is no advertising idea.
Exactly.
You just play. So that's the extreme of the scale. So if you started to make that copy slightly more engaging, if you started to include an advertising idea, if you somehow dramatized the benefit of that, if you dramatized the benefit in ways that were attractive, if you then had copywriters writing copy to explain why this car is particularly good, if you put in the time at the front to determine which audience you need to attract, then the content of the working media will become more effective. What that means is that non-working is a multiple of working in terms of the equation. And this is something that I published in How to Buy a Gorilla. If X is the content and Y is the media, Z is share of mind. X times Y equals Z. So if you reduce the value of X because you're reducing the value of non-working, you're going to reduce the overall share of mind. And again, that goes back to the whole idea of risk. And when we spell it out in these terms, it's pretty irrefutable. But then, the problem that you have is that a lot of the time these negotiations are being had with people in the room who aren't either responsible or accountable for the return on investment, i.e. a lot of marketing procurement. Then now, that's not to say, all marketing procurement is evil, blah, blah, blah. That's not the case at all. There are some people in marketing procurement who are incredibly good. But I think pretty much everybody who is very good in marketing procurement would say that they represent the minority and that most organizations have not yet recalibrated the role of marketing procurement as to managing investments such that actually they often work against the best interests of their own organizations, which is pretty hard to fathom, but is the case.
The WFA released Project Spring a year or so ago, 18 months ago, whatever it was. And Project Spring was all about marketing procurement people saying, and in fact, the strapline was moving from cost to investment. It was all about procurement seeing marketing as an investment, not a cost. And they're grand words. And no one would refute it. But I think as many people have said on many podcasts, but the reality is procurement people are still driving cost savings because they're driven by a financial agenda, often reporting to a CFO on short-term shareholder returns. And so the wheel keeps turning. And so it's the fox problem, fox and the chicken problem. Like they can't help themselves.
Yes, it is. And I think it was Mencken who said it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And therefore, if there isn't an incentive for marketing procurement to say, hey, guys, maybe it would be a good idea if I didn't do this. Actually, what I should do is be helping you maximize the return on this and mitigate risk rather than trying to drive down investment. That's not going to happen.
Exactly.
That's an order or an instruction or a change that needs to come from above. This is a conversation that needs to happen in the C-suite above procurement to say, guys, what are we doing? This is nuts. We're actually harming ourselves in the way that we do this.
Exactly.
But the other side of this, though, is for agencies to just stop doing what they're doing, which is capitulating at the point of someone in marketing procurement trying to reduce their investment. And that happens.
So this is do you want to talk about discounting, David?
Well,
about why discounting is such should be a word banned in any agency vocabulary, I believe.
That's probably in the don't get me started bucket. I mean,
Go on,
I
get started,
remember,
David. It's always worth a bit of a chat.
Well, I give you an example. I remember I was commissioned to do a piece of relationship management work between a big financial services brand and their agency, their creative agency, that was proving difficult at the time. And I wrote up a proposal and I put it into marketing, and I met the head of marketing and I met the marketing director, the managing director, and they all said, yes, this looks great. Let's go and do this. And I said, fine. Who's going to issue me a PO? And I said, oh, you just have to go through procurement. So I then went and sat down in front of 3 people in procurement who looked at my proposal and they said, okay, so this looks quite expensive. How can we reduce this price? Well, I can do less.
Yeah,
what do you mean? So, well, the scope's there. So, you tell me what you don't want me to do, and I'll do that and reduce the price accordingly. But, you might want to clear that with marketing. They said, okay, exactly. So I don't think that's a good idea.
You get a lower return.
Yeah. Or you increase the risk of my project not being effective. Whichever way you want to look at it. But, I cannot do stuff. And it's your prerogative to say, I don't want you to do this, I don't want you to do it. So that will reduce your cost. No, I don't think that's the way forward. Okay, so what more can you do for this? I said, well, what more do you want me to do? Well, is there any way that you can add value? I said, well, I can do more for more. If you want to increase the scope, I can increase the scope and I can increase the fee. Yes, absolutely, and I'll increase the fee accordingly. They said, that's not really what we had in mind. We had in mind that you would do more for this period. I said, well, look, let me summarize it for you. So this is the price that I've determined for the job that I've agreed with marketing to do. I can do less for less. I can do more for more. Or I can do this for this. You choose.
Correct.
And that was the end of the conversation. You just have to hold your nerve. Because so often...
And be prepared.
You
have to be prepared.
You have to be prepared not to bid against yourself.
Exactly. Don't negotiate against yourself. It's a bad idea. Hopefully the listeners, maybe we'll repeat it. Maybe it's a good thing to repeat. Do not, under any circumstance, bid against yourself.
If the opportunity presents itself, for you to bid against yourself, perhaps turn it down.
Including reverse auctions on your fee. Oh,
that's another don't get me started bucket. Reverse auctions. I mean, the thing is, and this is another thing for agency negotiators to catch up on. Procurement has strategy, and it has valid, reasonable, effective strategies in buying. So there's a guy called Kraujic who created the Kraujic matrix, which is something that I also refer to in How to Buy a Gorilla. And if nothing else, you'll find it there. But you'll find it online. And essentially,
by the way, good second plug. Well done.
Thank you. What Kraujic said was, if you can define clearly the value or the quality standards of the thing that it is that you're buying, and you've got a high amount of buying power, then you should negotiate the hell out of it. So that's a perfect example for an online auction. So if you're online auctioning because you're buying volumes of concrete at a standard that's measurable and that's checkable, then all you're doing is you're moving the seller's profit to the buyer's profit at no risk. Yeah. But if you're doing that for an investment, it's the most insane application of any kind of buying tool that you can imagine. So, sorry, rant over. Excellent.
Well, given that we've got about 6 minutes, David, because I'm respecting your time, and we've got 2 questions, should we move on? No.
We should.
I took us off course. Can you touch briefly on the role of intermediaries in the pitch process?
Yes, I mean this is an interesting one. I struggle with the intermediary market as it mostly exhibits itself, because I struggle to see their total impartiality when so many of them charge fees from the agencies in order for the agencies to be considered. And it's come up so often when I've approached an agency and they say, okay, yeah, and how much do you want? And I have to say, well, actually, it's only the brand that pays me. Agencies don't pay me because then I would have a conflict of interest.
You'd have a conflict of interest, correct.
So I think the role of the intermediary has got to start from a place of impartiality. Now, having said that, many listeners might know that, you know, I've done consultancy work and training work for many agencies. So how do I square the circle of impartiality as a base camp if I take money from agencies for consultancy and training and then represent brands in search process, of which some of those agencies have appeared? Well, the answer is that at the beginning of the process, firstly, I tell the brand, X agency bought this from me at this value on this year.
You disclose it.
It's a declaration of pecuniary interests. That it's called. I have no obligation to them because they bought the service for which I then provided, and the contract was closed. The project was finished. There's no ongoing project or contract. Correct. And the second is that I tell the agencies. So if an agency is in a competition and they're down to, you know, it needs to get down to the final three. I don't go across 10 agencies saying everybody that I know and everybody that I've worked with. But I do say that if you get down to the final three, I will make it absolutely clear that some of these agencies I may have worked for, and I will tell you who they are. And I've done that in the past.
Exactly.
And agencies are entirely comfortable with that. But I think you should be more comfortable with that than being shepherded into a pitch process because it's your turn to have a go in the hope that you might convert something that you're not suitable for because you're paying an annual fee. And the annual fees are not small. So I think there's a standard that needs to be applied to the intermediary role that I think is currently woefully absent in many intermediaries' MOs. I think that's a first point. And the second point is that you, as an intermediary, you have to really think about what it is that you're trying to solve. It's not finding an agency which has just got a famous brand or has done, that's the one that did this campaign or that's the one that did that campaign. That's the one that effectively solved problems the likes of which you've got. And therefore, it's about identifying agencies that have got ideally that have got a proven record of having the brains still in the agency that have solved problems similar to the ones that you've got. I hear a lot of complaints about pitch processes through intermediaries and not through intermediaries, and a lot of claims that the pitch process is broken and so on. You don't have to spend long in a brand's shoes to know that if you awarded an agency a contract without a pitch and the campaign failed or something went wrong, drastically wrong, and somebody asked, so how did you pick this agency? You said, well, they kind of, I just kind of went with them.
Met them in a pub one day. Seemed like nice blokes.
Yeah, exactly.
Seemed like nice people.
So there's a certain governance that one has to have. Now, I use it again in extreme to make a point. But at the same time, for example, you can have agencies that are clear are the only ones that are going to be able to solve a job. They are so good. They are so well differentiated. Yeah, you don't necessarily need a pitch for that if you've got the authority on the client side to say, no, we don't. A nice analogy for this is architecture. So Norman Foster is probably my favourite architect, right? Steve Jobs needed a new HQ in Cupertino, California. So he rang up Norman Foster and said, I need your help. There was no pitch process. It was, who's the very best architect I can think of? I want him. That's winning without pitching. Yeah. That's brilliant. Absolutely no need for any intermediary, no need for any search, and so on. Likewise, when he went back to Apple, they were in the process of a procurement process. There's videos online of this, of him saying, we've got 11 global agencies lined up for this business, and he just threw it all out at the point of TBWA. I know that TBWA can do this. That's who we're going to go with. I'm going to go and work with them. And that's when the Think Different campaign came out. To go back to architecture for a second, Norman Foster also did that amazing suspension bridge in the south of France. And they will have invested an awful lot of money in surveys and technical plans and drawings and costings in order to put together a proposal for something that was an order of magnitude more expensive than any of the competition, because it went from ridge to ridge across the valley instead of across the valley floor. So they were asking the people running the process to find multiples of what they had in mind. But at the same time, they won. Now, that's competing in a pitch process with a differentiated proposition, and that's what agencies need to do. So I don't think the age of pitching is gone, and I think there is a role for intermediaries, but I think there are a lot of actors in this space who need to pull their socks up.
I would agree. Entirely agree, actually. So, last question. So in 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, it's a big question, but
I'll speak at double speed.
Agencies, or only pick out the really important bits. Exactly.
I will. Every other
agencies word. Going to be every other word? Are agencies going to be stuck selling time forever? We've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, as a consultant, I'm in a similar space. I think, again, this is something that I've resolved on my business with the use of the responsibility and control paradigm. So what I tend to do is, because I tend to get projects, so if a project comes to me, I'll price the project. Let's say, for argument's sake, I've priced the project at £40,000. Now, if someone says, can you break that down for me? I say, well, I can break it down for you, but I don't know why you want me to break it down, because, it's a whole. And this is how much it costs. So it's not like any of the component parts are then negotiable. Because I need the flexibility between these, there's a degree of unpredictability that I've had to manage and aggregate to get this price. Okay, well, what if we wanted to pay you by the day?
A key point here, menu-based pricing, again, is the devil. On the whole, menu-based pricing is a disaster.
Yeah, I think so. I want to come to that in a second. The point that I'm getting at, though, is that if a client says, well, actually, what I'd want to do is pay you by the day and then reconcile it, well, you can do that. But if I go over, then it's on you. Yeah. Currently, if I go over, then it's on me, and the risk is on me.
Exactly.
And if I go under, then the risk is on me, as long as no one's moving goalposts. But if you want me to do it by the day, and my estimation is under, which it most likely is, then you'll have to pay the difference. And that usually closes the conversation. With agencies, I would do a similar sort of thing, which is we have a scope of work. We estimate that scope of work. And what I've run very effectively before is, it's not the charging by the hour necessarily. It's the reconciliation of hours against the unpredictability of what it is that's being done. If you try to productize agency services as an antidote to charging by the hour, so you're saying it costs X for a brand strategy, it costs Y for a TV campaign, it costs Z to make a 30-second TV commercial, it costs A to make a 60-second TV commercial, or write a TV script. You can break that down as much as you like. All that's going to happen is that the more agencies do that, the more of a field of comparison there will be for procurement to pick at. The answer to improving margins is differentiating your quality and your ability to develop a return on it, to deliver a return on investment. And there isn't a way around that, because all you're doing is shifting the thing that the buyer is going to be able to compare. What you have to do is take the ability to compare off the table by being sufficiently differentiated or being so expert as to say, well, why would we possibly do that? I mean, it works similarly to benchmarking. Another don't get me started bucket, but benchmarking is a great example. So let's do a survey of all of these agencies' account directors, and we'll take an average. And let's say the average is is £100 an hour is what they charge for an account manager or an account director. Fine. So why are we paying more than £100 an hour? Well, do you want an average account director? We can just hire average people and put average people on your business to give you an average result.
Exactly.
Why should we be hitting an average? You've selected us because we're not average.
Correct.
You've selected us because we're the best for your match. So of course we're not going to hit benchmarks. Benchmarks are for the average.
Yeah.
That means that there are people who are much more expensive than that, and there are people who are much less expensive than that. The average is £100 an hour. So the whole concept of benchmarking and price comparison in that way is nuts. However, if we say we estimate it's going to be this much money, then all of the hours responsible for delivering what it is up to the agency. And the recording of hours becomes an internal agency tool to make sure that you're not over-investing where you don't want to be over-investing. And making sure that some clients are profitable, that sufficient clients are profitable. I've worked on pieces of business in agencies that made crashing losses, but the reputational benefit of having that piece of business far exceeded it.
Exactly.
So
it's an internal
there are two
tool.
sides to,
Absolutely.
100%. So it's an internal tool to make sure that you're making money. It's an internal tool to make sure that if you're losing money, you know where you're losing it and by how much. And it's an internal tool so that you can allocate resources in a way that is vaguely sensible. But charging by the hour isn't going to go away. Reconciliation and differentiation such that you can improve your margin is the way forward as far as I see it.
Yeah. So, on that note, David, it's been a pleasure having you as a guest. In fact, it's been amazing.
It's
been a lot of fun.
Always fun.
It's always
fun chatting with you, Mike.
Exactly. I honestly, David, I love having our conversations because I have to try and keep up mentally sometimes, which is always great. So you challenge my thinking, which is fantastic.
Don't worry, you and me both.
Where can people find out? Where can people find out more about you, and where can they buy your new book?
My new book, Tuning Up. My new book, Tuning Up, is available at Tuning Up, Mike. Tuning Up is available. Tuning Up is available at tuningup.co.uk, where you can get the hardback. If you want a digital version, you can get it from Amazon. You can find out more about me and what Tuning Up is and responsibility and control. And you can try your own diagnostic to determine how well your relationships are running. That's also on the website and free of charge. And you can find out more about me and how to buy Gorilla and what I get up to at www.htbag, standing for howtobuyagorilla.co.uk. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure to join you this afternoon. What a lot of fun. We need to do this much more often.
We need to do it a lot more often, David. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you ever much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.